As we start to look at and getting into more detail about the specifics of Greek culture, we're going to, of course, build on what we learned in regards to the Minoan and Mycenaean civilizations, as well as that cultural idea and the behavioral ideas that are exposed in the works of Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey. And as I had referenced earlier, and the reading is also referencing this, the city-state of Sparta, the polis as it's called, right? Polis is a city-state. The polis of Sparta is one of many in ancient Greece, but it gives us an interesting example of how we could go back and see that warrior ethos, that warrior concept that was powerful in Homer and active in Mycenae. How is it going to structure and influence Greek society? All right. For some of you, I don't know if you're college sports fans, but if you're a Big Ten fan, the Michigan State Spartans, let's start talking about it. All right. First thing, I have a simple phrase here, a cog in a machine. And the reason I'm using that is one way to express why Sparta is so interesting is that while we'll be looking at other places in Greece that will develop a concept that you will sort of label human rights, Sparta, not so much. That's not what they're going to be doing. So as you're reading, and as I offer you some summary here, take a look at what I'm talking about in terms of the creation of a society that is not as interested in individual rights. That will be what we'll talk about with Athens and other city-states. Sparta is a military machine. And so when we use the word machine, and I purposely gave you the word cog here, think in terms of a very complex machine with all different kinds of pieces, and they all interoperate to create a smooth running system. In the system that is Sparta, notice I'm not using the word, say, citizen. I'm not using the word king or queen. I'm simply going to be referring to many people in Sparta as if they were cogs in a machine, and let's talk about that in a second. To help make that point, let's take a look at what we have here. We have a concept in the modern world that as a parent, you give birth to a child, and the child is yours, your family, your child. What if you lived in a world where that wasn't necessarily true? In the case of Sparta, for Spartan citizens, when a Spartan mother gives birth, the Spartan state inspects the child for any physical or other easily seen problem, any kind of birth defect, and the Spartan state will say that the child cannot serve and may die, potentially be sold into slavery. But the idea here is that from the very beginning of birth, right, the very beginning, the Spartan state is there inspecting your child. You don't get to make a decision usually as the father or mother about the fate of your own child. In the case especially of males who come out of women who are Spartan citizens are inspected immediately, and if they are seen as deficient, will not be able to go to adulthood. Now, why? Well, let's go back to the cog in the machine mentality. If the Spartan state, from all of its Spartan citizens, wants excellent male and female members to continue the process of building the state and protecting it, in that context, if you reduce people down to cogs in a machine, do you want to use defective parts? Now that's cruel to think of, but remember, the Spartans are not talking about human rights here. They're talking about the individual's responsibility to the state. And in the case especially of boys, they are inspected at birth. They are allowed to stay with their families until they're roughly age 7, at which case, for lack of a better term, I'm going to tell you they're drafted. Right? At age 7, Spartan boys are drafted. They're taken from their families, and at least part of the time in a barracks situation. Right? Remember, let's go back to this for a second. The Spartan family does not have the right to train, educate, and raise their own son. That is the state's responsibility, and the state is serious about it. It started day 1 with birth, and now at roughly age 7, the boy is now essentially drafted into the army. There are lots of different ways in which they are trained in terms of group activities and self-reliance, but the process of training a soldier in Sparta is an ongoing process. The young boy will be in the barracks from 7 until roughly 20 or so, okay? Increasingly involved in military activity and training. And once again, not part and not actively involved in family life. And we'll get back to that in a moment. But if you want to think of this way, from their life all the way until age 60, Spartan men are expected to be army ready, soldier ready, ready to serve at a moment's notice, or constantly training. So that, once again, let's revisit the idea. From birth, Sparta did not accept the idea that that individual was an individual. It was almost as if to help you think of it as a cog in a machine, and what the Spartans are doing is then going to make more sense. They have dehumanized people in the sense that if the state, the government, the success of Sparta is the number one goal, then this is the system that will help assure that best. All right? In the other side of the coin, Spartan women, we'll get to them in a moment, but the idea is, think about this, if a state like Sparta has all of its men essentially in the army for all their lives, who's doing trade? Who's doing agricultural work? Who's doing all the other functions in society? And that's going to be a key issue here, because the Spartan devotion to the military is such that they're going to have to find other people with other responsibilities to conduct how society goes. You may see this inside of the text that you're using. There may be reference to a famous thinker named Lycurgus. Lycurgus is a Greek man who in many ways sort of explained what the Spartan state was and what they were trying to do with their male members and what they were trying to do to create a successful military. They have a long conversation inside of the process, and Lycurgus is what he's talking about is the creation of what are called hoplites. These are heavily armed Greek soldiers who will work in unison, who will be trained to work in unison, and will solve essentially military problems by staying together. They're not individual fighters one-on-one in a battlefield. They work as a contiguous unit. They're very powerful, and they are very organized and controlling. And to get to that stage, Lycurgus and others had the idea that you have to be totally devoted to essentially being a professional soldier. That your professional soldier role is going to be for life, and it's going to be the key to success in the Spartan state. Also, if all if all the men in Sparta are in the army or in leadership roles, somebody's got to grow the food. Somebody's got to transport things. Somebody has to, squish the oil out of the olives and make the wine and bake the bread. That's where Sparta has another aspect to it that is in many ways a very tricky one, but simply they have this idea of what are called elots, okay? That is simply slave, okay? That is simply a term for slave. And what's interesting inside of Sparta is that they have conquered a large area around them in a part of Greece called Laconia, if you want to find it on the map. And in that area, all the people they conquered, they have essentially made into slaves. And these slaves are doing most of the agricultural work and most of the backbone building of things in society, construction, because that way then all the soldiers in the Spartan army can all be full citizens and all the work is done elsewhere. So the first key element to understand why the Spartan military state could be successful is that you can look at the military success, but then behind it is the real work getting done. Massive numbers of slaves are doing it. That also means that they have to have a large devotion of their military to being ready to suppress slave rebellions. So the Spartan state is in many ways on sort of a rickety foundation. If the slaves ever get to be too many and are treated too badly, they will openly rebel. Will the Spartan state have enough power to control them or not? That's going to be a balancing act that the Spartans are going to have to set. Another element to think about in the creation of Sparta is, think of it this way. If all the men in the family are gone and the slaves are in the field, somebody has to be getting the work done. Marriage alliances, buying and selling things, buying and selling slaves, educating the younger children, running the household economy. This is where Spartan women, in terms of Greek society, have more freedom and more ability than many other places. Now let's make sure we understand this. This is not an attempt in Sparta to make women full citizens. It's not to grant them more and more power. But let's think of it. If all the male members of the family age 7 and higher are essentially gone on military service, and the family needs to continue and have its status and control its land, somebody has to do that, and then by default that means women. So don't look at Sparta and say, aha, see, here's a society that is more progressive in the sense that it's going to offer more rights to women. No, let's put it in the context of what the Spartans saw it as. If all the men are gone and all the slaves are working, we need to rely on the women. Take a look within your chapter readings as well as within your practice questions and see where you can organize your thoughts and understand that the creation of Sparta is a vital sense, it's in a vital sense is going to provide you with one kind of Greek polis, and we'll talk about some more, especially Athens, as we move forward.